Hi, you're watching BloombergQuint. Now, India seeks to double its urban metro lines to over 1,700 kilometers, roughly by the year 2025. We're approximately at about 700 kilometers as per the last count. It's an ambitious target, and the need for urban transport solutions at scale is absolutely undeniable. But the question is, how do we make them viable? To discuss that, I'm joined by someone today who has incredible experience at building out, not just a metro service, but looking at transport solutions as a whole. Elias George, the former head of Kochi Metro, and now he is head of infrastructure and government at KPMG. Elias, thank you very much for joining us here at BloombergQuint. The Prime Minister himself, Elias, has set a very ambitious target for metros as part of the urban transport solution, saying we should be able to cross at least 1,700 kilometers by 2025. That's one way of looking at it. We're now looking at metro projects in more than 25 cities. Off the bat, what's your first sort of response or reaction to the fact that we have such an ambitious target?
Menaka, in the question that we have these mass rapid transport systems in the cities of India, because the way India is urbanizing and the way this is a twin solution to the problems of urban choking and transport gridlock, we cannot really do with this paradigm of personal transport vehicles in cities anymore. And what the country needs is a migration to urban transit in terms of these MRTS solutions. As we speak, about 15 Indian cities have metros, about, as you said, 25, and even some more are planning metros. No question that this is a solution that the urban India needs.
Okay. When you say 25 cities are in the process of planning urban metros, now these range from large, probably the large metropolis in the country, Mumbai, to much smaller cities like Nagpur or even Gandhinagar. Kochi was a smallish metro as well. Can you talk us through how does one look at population, density of population, size, geographical size of the city to determine whether it would be right to be looking at metro as a solution in all of these 25 cities and maybe another 10 more over the years? Is there an ideal size?
Yeah, the metro is a catch-all phrase for a variety of solutions. It can range from what the Niti Aayog calls a neo-metro to a light metro. It is basically ranging in scale from metros with the rubber tires to a much lighter version of the metros which you see in cities like Kochi, etc. One of the problems this country has is that our urban planners go and decide on the vehicle first before looking at the outcome. And smaller cities may not need so much expensive solutions in terms of the big metros that we have. So I think the way to start is by looking at the mobility requirements of a city and planning it out from there, and then deciding on what's the kind of vehicle you need for a city. But having said that, what happens in this country is that eventually the traffic catches up with what was put on ground. So I don't see that as a long-range problem.
So using these 25 cities, and let's say, assume that we were to add another 10 or 15 or 20 of this size or these varying sizes to the list of cities that deserve metro as part of their urban transport solution, would be absolutely justified.
It would be justified, but with the caveat that the mode of the type of metro we install there should be sort of in tune with the transport requirements of the city. In terms of the number of people per hour, it's called PHPDT, the passenger throughput per hour. And that is a determinant which decides what kind of vehicle we need in terms of a light metro or a neo metro or the larger metros which cities like Delhi have.
So how would you assess the success of a metro? Elias, we have something as old as the Kolkata metro, something far relatively newer like the Delhi metro. Hopefully Mumbai will be operational in the next 2 years or 3 years. How do we determine the viability of these projects? What was your experience at Kochi Metro?
Look, Menaka, if you look at the financial balance sheet of metro companies, most of them will be in the red. Of the 200-odd metros in the world, only a handful make profit, like the Hong Kong metro or the Tokyo metro, because of the sheer size of passenger traffic they carry, as well as the other things they do, like commercial, real estate, etc. But people build metros not for financial viability of the metro companies. They build metros because of the economic viability that it brings to a city. It enhances working hours of people, safety of women. It brings in a culture of modernism into the city. It enlarges the property values of the places around it and so on. So basically the way of looking at a metro viability is what is called the economic rate of return. The government of India has postulated a minimum EIR, the economic rate of return, about 14 to 15% while evaluating these metro proposals. And that's a way to look at a metro requirement in any city.
So does the Delhi Metro meet the 14 to 15% economic rate of return?
I don't recall the final figures, but the way they are going, I think they've reached operational profits, is what I recall. But look, there is no two ways about whether Delhi needs a metro or not. Look at some of the benefits of a metro system are very difficult to quantify in terms of numbers. Look at what it's done for the pollution situation in Delhi. Look at the number of cars it's taken off the roads, etc. So these are no-brainers. In a city like Delhi, you really require metro to permeate the entire city. And actually, Menaka, a metro is the central nervous system of city, around which the entire architecture sort of reforms itself. The passenger traffic and private vehicles circulation patterns also change once a metro comes. So basically, I'd say the metro is a disruptor of urban transport. And once a metro comes, the key here is to realign the other transport modes around the central nervous system. If you can do that well, the city will improve, the rates of return will follow automatically.
What was your experience at Kochi? Elias, if you could talk us through both the setting up experience, the financing experience, and the financial viability experience.
So Kochi, we had a greenfield metro. There was nothing on ground. Kochi was the first city in the state to acquire a metro, etc. It's a small, charming town, about 2 million people. And here also we decided on the vehicle before the requirement, frankly, but it all turned out well in the end. So what we did was we used metro as a lever to completely reconfigure the traffic system in Kochi. I think Kochi is one of the first cities in the country to have what is called a Unified Metropolitan Transportation Authority, empowered by an act of the state legislature, which says basically that whether it's an auto rickshaw or your cycles or your taxis or your buses, they will all form part of an integrated system. And the idea here is to move people from personal vehicles into a metro system or a public transport system. Once these things start working efficiently as one entire network, people find it convenient to get out of a metro station and then take the next kind of whatever he or she requires, and move on. And this is still a work in progress in Kochi. The act is there. We are integrating all those parts together. Once it happens, my guess is that we'll see a massive migration of people from cars into the public transport system, including people like the well-off who are now dependent on vehicles. And that is the transformation which that journey needs to be done in every Indian city, like you see in the West, for instance. That will solve the political problem and a lot of the other issues.
Okay, I want to ask you a couple of financial questions, but before I get to that, I think to me, the one, I won't say shortcoming, but the one challenge has been whether when the metro system itself is designed, whether some of these aspects are looked at in entirety. Of course, they're looked at. I'm not suggesting anybody designs it without looking at it, but whether they're looked at in entirety. And I understand in public life and public governance in India, maybe it's not easy to move all the pieces together. So you have to move it slowly. But I do remember that about a year and a half down the line, ago, when we had asked the authorities implementing the Mumbai Metro, if they had charted out a map of how they would run, let's say, buses or taxi corridors to metro stations and back, they said we're in the process of working on those plans. So do we sometimes sort of, place the cart before the horse or the horse before the cart?
Very good question, Menaka. It's a personal bugbear of mine. The way the projects are conceived and designed and the detailed project reports are made in this country, a lot more improvement needs to be done. There is a famous statistics that you spend about 2% of a project on the planning phase in India. Worldwide norms in the US, it's about 8% of project cost. It takes much more time to design a system like a metro than to implement it. This is not something we are very great at in this country. As you rightly said, when you plan a metro for a city, you look at the requirements of the entire traffic of the city as a whole, not happening. And normally the DPRs, the detailed project report, the DPR is prepared by the very same entity who's got an interest in running the metro. That's not the way it should be. There should be a kind of arm's length relationship between the entity which does the planning and looks at the viability of the project and the entity which does it. Not yet happened in India, but I think a lot of strides have been made. This is something we need to do much better in the years ahead.
Since you now work in this space with a consulting firm, do you see this getting factored into? We have 25 metro projects underway, in various stages, planning to execution, etc. Is enough attention being paid to this?
So I've been watching the space very carefully, Menaka. One of the good things is a lot of information exchange happening between the chiefs of the metro companies in India, between the city planners and the government officials. A lot of learnings are taking place. I think there's a compared to what we were doing here. When Delhi started, it was only a focus on metro alone, I suppose. But now the way things are developing, the way people are getting more aligned with the requirements of urban combined transport systems, a lot of progress has been made. I think the new cities which are coming up will be much more alive to the need to do the entire planning for a city, do the what is called the last mile connectivity, which is between the metro station and the place you go to at the end of your journey as part of the whole metro planning, etc. It's coming together. I think it's only a matter of time before we do this integrated planning that you speak about.
Okay. This economic rate of return that you spoke of is fine if the cost and both the implementation of the project cost as well as the running cost is being taken care of by either the central or the state exchequer, depending on how that works. It isn't necessarily fine or easy to sort of work out in terms of financial viability if there's a private party involved who therefore needs to make some degree of financial rate of return and not just economic rate of return. Can you talk me through how metros are being financed in this country, whether it's multilateral financing, or central financing, or state financing, or private participation?
The way it works, Menaka, is that a part of the capital cost is brought in by the central government as equity into the metro company. It's normally a 50-50 sharing between the center and the states, but that's not enough. You require a large amount of debt financing to run a metro company. And the way it's been happening in this country is you have all of these bilateral financing agencies, like the German KfW or the French AFD, or even the ADB for that matter. All these entities are interested in funding metro projects, JICA, for instance, Japanese agency, etc., for the reason that this is a great contributor to alleviating the carbon emissions of a city. And that's an outcome of these organizations, basically. So getting institutional finance is not a big challenge in this country. Also, we are moving on from those models. The one way of bringing in the private sector is to do what is called an annuity model. And people are looking at getting a metro coach company come and invest in a metro system, and in return, you pay back their investment in installments based on the revenues you get from the city. These models are all happening as we speak. So basically, it's going to be a combination of state funding through the budget, institutional financing long-term by these entities, as well as private play. All three need to come together in a very nice way for metros to be sort of the 50, 25 metros we speak about to be realized very shortly.
So I understand the ERR. How many of these 25 metros in your assessment, Elias, will actually turn a financial rate of return or a financial profit over, let's say, a period of 10, maybe, or even 15 years?
Frankly, Menaka, it's very difficult to hazard a guess on the financial rate of return. But again, it's just the point that the benefits of having this kind of a modern MRTS, a rapid transport system, are so pervasive and not very easy to capture in numbers. We should not really look at financial rate of return beyond a point and look at the benefits it brings to a city in terms of the quality of life of people, safety, investments, etc. If we have tools for capturing all that, I have no doubt that some of it, and there are methods of translating the economic return into financial return by what is called land value capture. When a metro runs to a new place, the land value goes up, government can take some of that money back in terms of additional taxes and so on. All these very innovative instruments are available to the government and metro companies. Some of them are being implemented. So I don't think we should really be hung up on the pure Catholic financial rate of return, so to speak.
So it's not a matter of being hung up. I'm just trying to figure out, like for instance, you pointed out, right? Land values rise in and around where the metros run, and if there's some way for the government to monetize that, and I understand that there are many ways to sort of try and make a metro profitable. My question to you is, has anyone succeeded in doing that?
I would not say, I cannot give you a very clear yes to that one. There have been models where some buoyancy, some revenue buoyancy has been provided, but we are in a very early days of this kind of what is called non-fare revenue collection in Indian metros. So basically, metro revenues come from what is called the fare box, which is your ticket cost, and these non-fare revenues. Delhi Metro has done a lot of commercial development around metro stations, which is giving them some revenue. Even in Kochi, one of the stations I remember was sold out to a private entity at about 6 crore a year for advertising in the station. That's a lot of money for a small town for Kochi in one station. And these models are still works in progress, frankly. But I think going forward, people will be looking at it much more closely.
So it's your recommendation that we don't look at profitability, whether I consider the Delhi Metro, the Bangalore Metro, or the Kochi Metro. this is not the time to look at profitability. This is not the time to see if these ventures can actually be financially viable, because the entire ecosystem of benefits is so large that even if these were to run in losses, I mean, the stakeholders should be able to tolerate that. But then what happens to the private sector participation in this?
I think the private sector investments have to be ring-fenced in terms of an annuity return by the metro company. Otherwise, private sector won't come. It won't be viable for them. So what happens is that the revenue burden of these metro projects is generally borne by the state government. Whatever losses happen to a metro company, except in the case of Delhi, I think that's some other arrangement. In the states, the losses have to be borne by the government in the initial years. But there should be strong incentives for the metro administration to move from that paradigm into one where these kind of other revenue streams sort of provide that buoyancy. But early days, I would say the state exchequer may have to bear the burden for the next couple of years.
But this is not the arrangement for the Delhi Metro for sure. They are not ring-fenced, right? So we've seen enough debate on ticket prices in the past. We've seen the state government want to announce free tickets for women. Who would bear the cost of that? Well, the state obviously said they would. So this has not been the model, at least for the metro so far. Correct me if I'm wrong, because the models are different for each metro.
You're right there, because I think there's a lot of public policy compulsions to keep a metro fare low. If you really peg the metro ticket price to what the market should yield, then there's a big differential, as in the case of Delhi Metro. So that will be a long play, I suppose, not easy, because so many other factors in terms of citizens' concerns, etc. There is a gap that, frankly, as you hinted, yeah.
There is a gap, you're saying.
There is a gap, yeah, there is a gap.
So given that gap, again, I'm not in the least bit knocking the utility of a metro or the need for metros, but given that gap, what should we learn about how we implement metro projects in these 25 cities or the next 25 thereafter? What would you put down as the 3 or 4 things that these projects must focus on, to be able to deliver not just the economic rate of return, but also a financial rate of return?
So, Menaka, it's a very difficult policy choice. It's not easy to deliver a diktat saying that the metro ticket prices should be pegged to what the metro system can bear. I would say that's not going to happen in a country like India. We have to move a lot of less well-off people to the metro system to get to work and so on. What I would say is that the amount of, policy motivation for a metro administration to look at other revenue streams is still inadequate in this country. I think a lot more pressure needs to be put on state governments, on city administrations, and the metro companies to a lot of leverage this kind of things like what is called the land value capture, transit-oriented development, it's called, when a new area automatically develops when a metro goes there to get some of those revenue streams in. These should be mainstreamed into the charter of metro companies and city administrations. Second thing, related piece we need to do better, there's always sometimes a disconnect between the metro company and the municipal corporation where the metros run. They need to work seamlessly, they need to plan seamlessly, do the revenue planning, etc., and work together. If that part works well, I think a lot of the non-fare revenue challenges in this country can be settled in a much better fashion.
Okay, I go back to my original question, Elias. I mean, you've explained to us the challenges of getting a metro to deliver on all of these objectives. Are we rushing through the number of metro projects that we're doing in this country? Because there are several urban transport experts who believe that these high-cost projects are maybe not the best solutions for many smaller cities. And yet these smaller cities, I might even hazard a guess saying cities like Kochi, have gone ahead and invested large amounts of money, which they probably are never going to be able to recover, even if you were to take the ERR into consideration and not just a FRR.
It boils down to what I was trying to say. We should not be focused on the output, but the outcome. And there are much cheaper versions of metros available, like the Niti Aayog has come out with a concept called Neo Metro, which is basically a metro on rubber tires. Much cheaper than a metro system is, because the civil structures are lighter, the coaches are cheaper, etc. So I'd say that depending on the requirements of the city, we should start in a very small way and migrate into a much bigger metro only when the population can bear it. That's a very good point you made. I think this is something which our city planners need to sort of imbibe when they start planning for these mass rapid transport systems. That is something.
There was some criticism even about whether the Kochi metro was fully, how do I put it, thought through in terms of population density, ridership, the ability to recover any of the costs, because at the end of the day, this is taxpayer money that's going into it, and whether there were better solutions, that could have been deployed as opposed to a metro itself.
If you look at, keeping apart Delhi for a moment, if you look at the other metros in this country, I think what I sense is that the planned traffic has not been attained in any of these metros in the country. So you have a right point, and this is a learning we need to imbibe when we plan future metros. But having said that, if you look at transportation infrastructure in this country, look at Delhi Airport, the T3, for instance. Any infrastructure, the crowds will swarm it within a couple of years. So what I'm saying is that the needs of the city will gallop so much, the way our cities are growing. I think 50% of India will be urban by 2030 is the figure which I have in mind. So basically, now, yes, but where are we going to be 7 or 8 years hence? I have a sense that smaller cities, tier 2 cities like Kochi, etc., the systems are going to be swamped. So, I mean, it's a very difficult choice, but your point is a very fair one.
So if you're saying that globally there are about 200 metros and only 10 make money, that's the ratio. And when I say make money, I'm not disregarding the other benefits of the metro at all. But eventually any public infrastructure project, because it's taxpayer money at work, needs to fully justify itself. That's the same ratio we should apply in India, that, maybe 5% of metro projects will become financially viable.
Menaka, there must be a very good reason why the other 200, less than 10 or 12, are going for metros. The reasons are very difficult to quantify in terms of the balance sheet of a metro company. What I would say is that...
No, but if I just looked at it from financial viability point of view, you're saying we should expect that the global average would apply to India as well. Of course, maybe we can improve it with some of the learnings from across the world in our own cities, but we'd look at maybe 5 or 10% of the metro projects in this country actually being able to turn a financial return. The economic return, of course, I understand, is different and in many ways intangible or even unquantifiable.
That is a thought nobody can quarrel with what you said just now. But I think that is only, we should take it as a given and move forward, because what's the other way? The other way is traffic gridlock, carbon emissions, and the quality of living plummeting in a city from year to year. So the downside is too horrendous to contemplate. And the only way out for a city to sort of unlock itself is to have these kind of systems. And the traffic system will sort of realign around the metro, and the city will become a much better, cleaner, safer place to live in. That's why we do metros.
All right. Now, one last question. This is a broader question that goes beyond the metro. We, of course, have the Elon Musks of the world recommending high-speed tunnels and things like that. In your assessment, as you look at infrastructure and urban planning, across India and across the world, maybe even, what are some of the newer solutions that cities are deploying in other parts of the world to take care of the very issues that you have listed through this conversation?
I would say that, these are very frontline, technologies. I'm not very sure whether we should be prepared for that wave now. My thought, and that's a very personal thought, is that we should look for robust, replicable, low-cost solutions in this country, given our financial crunch, etc. Move people from place to place using the least expensive mode of transportation. Maybe it can be electric buses on top of a civil structure, which is a form of metro itself. I think India, that is the way to go for India. Some of these newer solutions may apply for places like Bombay, Pune, etc., where some experimentation is going on. But otherwise, I think we should replicability, robustness, and sustainability. These should be the catchwords for designing urban transport.
Elias George, thank you so much for joining us and talking us through this issue as we look at a rapid expansion of metro lines across the country. Thank you very much for your insights today here on BloombergQuint.
Thanks, Brenda.